The morning my world tilted began with nothing but silence, until 5 HOA inspectors and a suited lawyer appeared at my gate like a formation of vultures circling fresh prey. Their clipboards gleamed in the rising sun, their expressions carved with purpose, and their slow advance across my gravel drive felt like an invasion. Something deeper than anger stirred in my chest, instinct, warning, a surge of defiance that rose like wildfire. I didn't know what they wanted, but I knew one thing. If they were coming for me, I wasn't meeting them empty-handed. Before I tell you how this confrontation turned my entire community upside down, subscribe, because when unfair power meets quiet resilience, justice deserves to be witnessed. The day began with a stillness that felt almost unnatural, a kind of early morning calm that wraps a man in a false sense of normalcy before reality tears through it like a storm. I had woken before sunrise, stepping onto my porch with a mug of coffee and letting the cool air fill my lungs. Nothing hinted at the chaos that would break over me just a short time later. The world felt ordinary, and I breathed in that simplicity without knowing how fast it was slipping away. I saw them first as shadows moving just beyond the fence line, slow, deliberate, too organized to be neighbors out for a morning walk. They emerged from the pale glow of dawn with clipboards in hand, reflective badges pinned to their shirts, official-looking jackets zipped up despite the rising temperature. 5 HOA inspectors fanned out like a tactical unit approaching a target, and behind them, the unmistakable silhouette of a man in a dark suit, stepping with the smug assurance of someone already convinced he owned the land under his feet. A lawyer. Not the friendly kind either. The type hired when the HOA wanted something done immediately, quickly, decisively. Every step they took pressed the air tighter around me. Even from a distance, their posture radiated judgment, the kind of quiet hostility that comes wrapped in bureaucratic politeness but still feels like a knife sliding between the ribs. I set my coffee on the porch rail, the cup clinking louder than it should have, and felt my heartbeat pick up in a slow, controlled rhythm. The house was quiet behind me. No cars on the road. No dogs barking. No early tractors rolling from the field. Just these 6 figures crossing my property line with the confidence of people who believed the rules belonged to them and the consequences belonged to everyone else. I didn't recognize them, which told me everything. When the HOA sent unfamiliar faces, it meant escalation. It meant strategy. It meant they had been planning something. The lawyer checked a folder in his hand, flipping through pages like a surgeon reviewing charts before an operation. His eyes lifted toward my gate as though he already expected me to come out and greet him, as though I owed him that courtesy. The arrogance of it sent a pulse of heat through my chest. I didn't know why they were here, but it wasn't going to be friendly, and it certainly wasn't going to be simple. I stepped back into the house, moving by instinct rather than thought. The shotgun rested in its usual place behind the hall door, as normal to me as grabbing a coat in winter. I didn't load it, didn't cock it, didn't treat it as a weapon. It was a symbol, something that reminded unwelcome visitors that my property lines were not suggestions. My land was my land, and no amount of official paper, polished badge, or legal threat would change that without honest cause. I lifted it with steady hands, feeling the familiar weight settle against my palm, grounding me in a way nothing else could. When I stepped back outside, the inspectors had reached the gate. They weren't touching it yet, but they stood close enough for their presence to feel like pressure against my ribs. The lawyer raised his hand like he was about to make some formal announcement, like the world paused and waited for his approval. The sun hit his polished shoes and the metal clasp of his briefcase, giving him a shine that felt almost theatrical. He didn't see the shotgun at first. His attention was swallowed by his performance, by the idea that he was stepping onto a stage where he held authority. But the inspectors saw it. Their eyes shifted first. One glance, then a second, then all 5 heads turned toward the barrel angled down at my side. Not threatening, not raised, just present. Their formation shifted slightly, a ripple of unease passing through them like wind moving through tall grass. They hadn't expected resistance, certainly not from someone who looked calm and composed. Their steps faltered, the certainty in their posture loosening just enough for me to see the truth. They weren't here by accident. They weren't here with questions. They were here with accusations ready, decisions made, judgments finalized long before they reached my gate. The lawyer finally noticed the shotgun. His voice paused on whatever rehearsed line he had been preparing, and for the first time, his expression changed. Not fear, annoyance. The irritation of someone whose script had been interrupted. He shifted his folder under one arm, clearing his throat in a way that suggested he believed his voice still commanded this land more than mine did. But something in the way he hesitated told me I had disrupted the power balance he expected to control. My pulse stayed steady, but the tension wrapped tighter, twisting through the air like a coiled wire. The wind picked up just slightly, carrying the faint scent of dust from the road. Birds scattered in the distance. Even the sky felt heavier, the light dimming as if the day was bracing for whatever was about to come. The inspectors exchanged glances, each one silently asking the same question: proceed or retreat? The lawyer stood firm, but cracks had formed in his stance. I stepped closer to the porch railing, not raising the shotgun but making sure it was unmistakable. Not a threat, just a reminder. A boundary. A line they would need to respect if they planned to step any further. The lawyer's jaw tightened as he prepared to speak again, flipping open the folder with exaggerated confidence. But before he could get a word out, something caught my eye, an envelope tucked beneath the stack of papers, stamped in bold red letters. A notice. Urgent. Immediate action required. The kind of document an HOA only served when they were done pretending to work with you. That was when I realized this wasn't just a visit. This was an ambush. And whatever they were about to tell me was going to change everything. The moment I saw that red-stamped envelope inside the lawyer's folder, a hollow pressure settled in my chest, something cold and instinctive, like a storm warning spreading through my veins. Urgent. Immediate action required. Those words never meant negotiation. They meant a verdict already carved in stone. The lawyer's expression held the quiet satisfaction of someone who believed he had already won, and the inspectors stood behind him with a practiced certainty that told me they expected compliance, not resistance. That envelope was the key to everything, and before they even opened their mouths, I knew they had brought something heavier than a simple violation notice. The wind pushed faint ripples across the tall grass by the fence, carrying the tension toward me as if the land itself understood what was coming. The lawyer straightened his spine and lifted one hand, preparing to speak with the measured tone of someone who thought authority was the same as power. The inspectors stepped into a loose semicircle behind him, their clipboards held like shield. They were creating a visual wall, a formation designed to intimidate, to overwhelm a homeowner into silence. But silence wasn't something I planned to give them. My shotgun rested comfortably at my side, angled down, never lifted, never pointed. Its presence alone changed the temperature of the moment. The lawyer hesitated again, annoyed but trying not to show it, adjusting his tie with a tug that betrayed unease. He had expected a frightened homeowner scrambling to apologize, not a calm man watching them like judges trespassing on sacred land. Their confidence flickered, and with it, the first crack of vulnerability appeared beneath their polished performance. He finally opened the folder, sliding the red-stamped document to the top of the stack. I could see the outline of the HOA's emblem on the corner, stylized trees, a curved road, the usual attempt at making control look picturesque. But the lettering beneath it told a different story. I couldn't read the words from where I stood, but I recognized the formatting, the spacing, the bold sections designed to demand attention. It was a formal enforcement notice. The kind that didn't show up unless the HOA wanted something massive, something that required legal backup, coordinated inspection, and immediate compliance. The lawyer cleared his throat, but before he spoke, I watched his eyes shift again toward the shotgun. His voice softened by a single degree, the tone adjusting just enough to acknowledge that I wasn't a bystander in this encounter. The inspectors stiffened behind him, glancing nervously between us as though waiting for a spark to ignite. The air itself felt stretched thin, humming with the pressure of something approaching a breaking point. I didn't interrupt, didn't move, didn't give them anything except steady attention that forced them to carry the weight of the moment. He began reading, his voice echoing slightly against the fence as he announced the HOA's decision. His words rolled out with the cold precision of rehearsed authority. They were claiming my property had several major violations: structures built without approved permits, landscaping that disrupted community coherence, and unspecified safety hazards requiring immediate correction. But he read it with a confidence that said there was more, something he hadn't reached yet, something heavier. And when he turned the page, the true purpose revealed itself. They were declaring my land a potential nuisance zone, a designation that gave them the right to initiate forced remediation. Under their interpretation of the bylaws, it meant they could enter, modify, or remove anything they deemed problematic. It wasn't just control. It was takeover. And the lawyer didn't pause for reaction. He moved to the next clause as if delivering routine instructions. But the moment he said the words "emergency compliance window," my pulse settled into a cold, steady rhythm. They weren't here to warn me. They were here to take the property. The inspectors stepped closer to the gate, their eyes avoiding mine now, focusing instead on their clipboards. They were preparing to document everything: measurements, photographs, notes, evidence to support whatever forced action they already planned. One leaned toward the latch, inching closer as though testing whether they needed permission or could simply proceed. Their formation tightened again, confidence returning now that the lawyer had spoken. They believed the paperwork gave them more power than the landowner standing before them. But they underestimated something fundamental. Paper might hold authority, but presence held boundaries. I stepped to the edge of the porch, the weight of the shotgun shifting slightly in my grip as the inspectors froze. Not raised, not lifted, just visible, a reminder of the laws that protected a homeowner's right to stand firm on his own property. Their steps faltered again, the semicircle loosening as they silently questioned whether the lawyer's paperwork outweighed the reality of the moment. The power they thought they carried wavered in the air between us, fragile in ways they hadn't expected. The lawyer tried to steady the situation, lifting the document higher as if it were a shield capable of overriding fear. He announced that I had exactly 72 hours to comply or the HOA would initiate action, up to and including forced remediation. The phrase tasted like a threat, something carefully worded to sound official but crafted to provoke submission. His voice grew firmer, leaning on legal authority to reclaim dominance. But it didn't land the way he intended. The inspectors didn't step forward. They didn't prepare to enter. They waited for a cue he couldn't give, not while I remained unmoved. My jaw tightened as I absorbed every detail. 72 hours. Forced remediation. Nuisance zone. They had built a case behind closed doors, crafted a coordinated strike, and delivered it with practiced precision. They had expected intimidation to break me before the conversation even began. But the moment became something none of them had anticipated. Instead of shrinking back, I felt something anchored deeper inside me, a slow-burning resolve rising through my chest, wrapping each breath in tempered steel. Their strategy required fear. Their plan depended on compliance. But standing there, watching the lawyer hold out that envelope like a final verdict, something shifted. They had come prepared to dismantle my life. Instead, they awakened something they weren't ready to confront. The lawyer extended the envelope toward me, expecting me to step forward and take it. But I didn't move, and the silence that followed felt like the moment before lightning hits the ground. The envelope hung in the air between us like a final ultimatum, suspended on the lawyer's outstretched hand as if the paper itself carried the authority to break a man's resolve. But I remained still, and that stillness unsettled them far more than any argument could have. The inspectors shifted uneasily, trading glances that revealed doubt creeping into their coordinated performance. The lawyer's polished confidence faltered again, a faint crack behind his stiff expression as he realized the moment wasn't unfolding the way he'd rehearsed. The longer I didn't move, the heavier the tension became, settling over the gravel like a quiet fog ready to swallow the morning. The land felt different now, charged, awake, watching. Even the quiet hum of the distant power lines seemed to pulse with an edge sharper than usual. The grass rustled lightly in the breeze behind me, acting like an invisible force pushing me forward while the weight of the shotgun grounded me to the spot. Across the gate, the inspectors appeared torn between duty and instinct. They clutched their clipboards tighter, holding them close like shields against an unseen pressure. The lawyer's breath tightened as he adjusted his stance, lowering the envelope slightly when he realized I wasn't stepping forward to take it. I watched every detail with a clarity sharpened by the moment. Their uniforms, their perfectly laminated badges, the glare bouncing off the lawyer's shoes, and the way the early sunlight caught the metal hinges of the gate, they all painted a picture of people who believed procedure created dominance. But dominance wasn't earned by paper or position. It was earned by presence, and for the first time since they walked onto my land, they seemed to understand that. Seconds stretched long and thin as the lawyer cleared his throat again, a forced attempt to reclaim control. He repeated the notice's terms with clipped diction, emphasizing the severity of the situation. Nuisance designation. Forced remediation. 72 hours. Unauthorized structures. His voice echoed with the repetitive cadence of someone who relied on authority's weight to override any resistance. But authority meant little when a man stood on his own soil with the quiet certainty of someone who would not be moved by intimidation. The inspectors finally stepped back half a pace, the shift subtle but telling. They were no longer advancing, they were waiting. Waiting for the lawyer to give them courage. Waiting for me to respond. Waiting for something to tilt the moment in one direction or another. Their uncertainty thickened the air, wrapping around us with a silent pressure that made each breath feel heavier than the last. The lawyer tried once more to stabilize the situation by switching to a calmer, almost conciliatory tone. He explained that the HOA had received multiple complaints about my land, vague accusations submitted anonymously. Landscaping violations, noise disturbances, safety hazards, all fabricated or exaggerated, but on paper they created a narrative the HOA could manipulate. The lawyer gestured toward the back of the inspectors as if their presence alone validated the claims. He spoke of community standards, shared expectations, and legal obligations. But beneath all the polished phrasing, something else lingered. The HOA wasn't simply asserting control, they were attempting to remove something or someone who didn't bend easily to their system. When he reached the final page of the document, he hesitated. Not because he had run out of words, but because what came next would reveal the true reason for their coordinated arrival. He glanced toward the inspectors again, seeking reinforcement, then finally turned the last sheet outward enough that I could see the bolded header across the top. Preliminary Property Acquisition Inquiry. The phrase crashed through the moment like a sudden gust tearing through a fragile structure. They weren't just designating my land as a nuisance. They were initiating the beginning steps of taking it. Whether through forced remediation fees, penalties, or legal maneuvering, they were setting the foundation to absorb my property into the HOA's controlled territory. It wasn't about violations at all. It was about expansion. The inspectors stiffened when they heard the phrase spoken aloud, as if realizing the full implications themselves. Their formation grew more rigid, but their nerves betrayed them again in the small movements, the tight grip on clipboards, the uneven shifting of weight, the quick glances toward the lawyer for reassurance. They had believed this was a routine enforcement. Now they understood it was something far more calculated. I let the revelation settle inside me, cold and deep, anchoring itself like a submerged stone. They wanted the land. Not the house. Not the view. The land. and they wanted it badly enough to send a lawyer and 5 inspectors at dawn, armed with paperwork designed to corner me into compliance. But beneath their official posture, their certainty had fractured. They were dealing not with a passive homeowner, but with someone who saw through the veneer of their intentions. The lawyer extended the envelope again, his movements sharper this time, his patience thinning. His voice rose with a rehearsed firmness meant to corral the situation back into his control. He instructed me to accept the notice. He insisted I had been formally informed. He reminded me of deadlines, legal pathways, and consequences for refusal. Emphasis layered over emphasis, each statement pressed harder than the last. But the tightening in his jaw betrayed something, anxiety beneath the performance. The inspectors inched back once more when I took a slow step down from the porch. My boots pressed into the gravel with deliberate weight, sending a soft crunch through the quiet. The lawyer's hand trembled slightly as I approached the gate, his confidence thinning like a thread stretched to its limit. The envelope hovered between us, a fragile symbol of the power he believed he held. The inspectors waited behind him like a hesitant wall, their posture torn between authority and self-preservation. But as I drew closer, something unexpected entered the edges of the moment: movement down the road. A vehicle approaching slowly, too deliberate to be casual, too timed to be coincidence. The inspectors turned first, confusion threading through their expressions. The lawyer glanced back, annoyance flashing across his face before concern overtook it. The car rolled closer, the engine humming low, its windows tinted just enough to conceal the driver. Dust rose behind its tires as it approached the gate, slowing to a near stop a short distance away. Every inspector tensed. The lawyer stepped back from the gate entirely. Something about that car changed everything. And I knew. This confrontation had only just begun. The slow approach of the vehicle shifted the entire atmosphere, as though someone had placed a new weight on the scale of an already fragile moment. The hum of the engine blended with the tension hanging in the air, building a pressure that tightened across the gravel drive. Dust drifted around the tires in lazy spirals, catching the morning light and turning the scene into something suspended between reality and an unfolding reckoning. The inspectors stiffened as if the car's presence disrupted the careful balance they'd built around their coordinated entrance. Even the lawyer, who moments ago stood poised with hollow confidence, stepped subtly to the side, creating distance between himself and the unknown arrival. The tinted windows betrayed nothing. No expression, no silhouette, no hint of intention. It rolled forward with deliberate calm, stopping just a few yards from the gate, close enough to assert presence, but not enough to trespass. The engine cut abruptly, leaving behind the soft ticking of cooling metal and an eerie silence that deepened the uncertainty. The inspectors exchanged nervous glances, their hesitation growing heavier as they stood waiting for a cue that none of them knew how to interpret. I didn't move from my position near the gate, though my senses sharpened with instinctual awareness. The land around us seemed to tighten in response, the air thickening with unspoken questions. My grip adjusted slightly on the shotgun, still held low, still angled harmlessly, but present with unmistakable intention. The lawyer's face shifted through expressions he struggled to conceal. First irritation, then concern, then the faint recognition that this situation was slipping further out of his control. A long moment stretched before the car door finally opened with a quiet click. A polished shoe touched the gravel first, then a leg, then the rest of the figure emerged. A man in an authoritative uniform, clean and distinct, but notably not from the HOA. His presence alone changed everything. He carried the posture of someone accustomed to giving direction rather than receiving it. His eyes scanned the scene with calm precision, taking in the inspectors, the lawyer, the gate, and the shotgun in my hand, all without flinching. He closed the door gently behind him and approached the group with the kind of measured restraint found in individuals who moved through conflict with experience rather than fear. The inspectors involuntarily stepped aside, creating a narrow path without being asked. Their reaction told me everything I needed to know. This was someone they hadn't expected, but someone they instinctively respected or feared. The lawyer tried to regain composure as the man approached, straightening his folder and adjusting his tie like armor. But the new arrival didn't acknowledge him first. His gaze settled calmly on me, as though evaluating whether the situation required escalation or simply understanding. He stopped a respectful distance from the gate, observing without judgment. The silence settled again, heavy enough to press against every breath. The inspectors waited rigidly, caught between roles they no longer fully controlled. The lawyer opened his mouth, preparing to speak, but the newcomer lifted a single hand, a gesture subtle yet authoritative enough to silence him immediately. The inspector's shoulders tightened in response, the ripple of uncertainty moving through them once more. The man finally spoke, his tone low and steady, a voice used to diffusing tense encounters. He addressed the inspectors first, asking simple, pointed questions. Why were there 6 HOA representatives on a single property without prior notification to the authorities? Why was an acquisition inquiry being delivered without documented due process? Why had a lawyer been sent instead of standard HOA correspondence? Each question carried weight, revealing not just curiosity but suspicion. The inspectors faltered under the inquiries, shifting nervously as they scrambled for explanations. Their whispers turned into tangled attempts at justification, exposing cracks in their narrative. The lawyer tried to intervene, raising the red-stamped envelope as though it legitimized everything. He spoke quickly, outlining bylaws and authority, painting the situation as routine enforcement. But the newcomer listened with a calm firmness that absorbed the words without accepting them. His expression didn't change, but the air around him carried the quiet certainty of someone who recognized manipulation when he heard it. As he examined the envelope, his brow furrowed slightly. He flipped through the pages, scanning each line with the discerning focus of someone who understood procedural integrity far more deeply than the lawyer anticipated. He paused on the acquisition inquiry page, noting the lack of signatures from required HOA board members. He questioned the supposed emergency designation, pointing out that no documented hazard had been identified. Every detail he mentioned strengthened the suspicion that this wasn't a lawful inspection but a coordinated overreach. The inspector's confidence dissolved further with each observation. Their formations loosened, their postures slumped, and their practiced demeanor faded into exposed doubt. The lawyer stammered through rationalizations, but they grew weaker the longer he spoke. The newcomer returned the envelope with a slow, deliberate movement, as though its weight had increased with every flaw he had uncovered. He turned to me again, steady and composed, acknowledging my position without judgment. The presence of the shotgun didn't unsettle him, nor did the tension surrounding the moment. He simply stated that he was responding to reports of a large HOA presence on private property and that his duty was to ensure no laws were being violated, by either side. His neutrality grounded the moment, rebalancing the dynamic in a way that neither the inspectors nor the lawyer had anticipated. The tension eased slightly, though the air still pulsed with unresolved conflict. The inspectors stood like children caught in a lie, waiting for consequences. The lawyer rebuilt his composure only in fragments, each attempt to explain sounding more desperate than authoritative. The newcomer, however, maintained calm focus, his presence anchoring the entire scene. Then, with a single measured step, he approached the gate and placed his hand on the top rail. He glanced between me and the group of HOA representatives, his expression firm but not aggressive. He asked one final question, one that cut through every layer of fabricated authority the HOA had brought with them. Is there legitimate, documented justification for initiating property acquisition proceedings against this homeowner? The question struck the inspectors like a blow. Their silence answered before any words could form. The lawyer opened his mouth, but nothing came out. And in that silence everything shifted. But the moment wasn't resolved. It was only the beginning of something larger, something deeper, something hidden beneath their visit. Because just as the newcomer lowered his hand from the gate, he noticed something behind the inspectors, something they had been shielding, intentionally or not. A second envelope, unopened, stamped differently, marked confidential, and whatever was inside it would shatter the rest of their plan. The second envelope shifted the entire balance of the moment, its quiet presence more unsettling than anything the HOA had spoken aloud. Unlike the red-stamped notice they had flaunted, this one was smaller, sealed tightly, and marked with a subdued but unmistakable label: confidential, internal use only. The inspectors had kept it tucked behind their clipboards, concealed from view until the newcomer's sharp eye caught the thin corner sticking out. Their collective flinch when he noticed it spoke louder than any confession. Whatever that envelope contained, it wasn't meant for me. And it certainly wasn't meant to be revealed in front of a witness outside their control. The air thickened around us again, tension rising like heat from the gravel. The newcomer's posture changed subtly, shoulders straightening, jaw tightening, gaze sharpening with controlled suspicion. He stepped closer to the inspectors, his presence pressing them backward without a word. The lawyer tried to intervene with a nervous explanation, insisting it was irrelevant to the current enforcement visit, but his voice trembled, betraying his unease. The newcomer didn't acknowledge him. Instead, he extended his hand toward the inspector who held the envelope, silent but resolute, giving no room for negotiation. The inspector hesitated, fingers tightening around the hidden document. His throat bobbed as he attempted to form a justification, but the newcomer's steady gaze dissolved whatever resistance he had left. Slowly, reluctantly, the envelope was placed into his open palm. The moment it changed hands, everything shifted again. The facade of procedural authority collapsed into the exposed reality of something deeper, something concealed beneath layers of orchestrated control. The newcomer examined the envelope carefully, turning it over without breaking the seal. The confidential stamp wasn't decorative. It was official, backed by internal HOA governance rather than anything meant for public or homeowner communication. That alone raised questions. The inspectors watched with dreading stillness, their posture unraveling like threads pulled from a tightly woven cloth. The lawyer's composure weakened into scattered fragments, forced smiles, restless hands, eyes darting to every possible exit point. The newcomer lifted his gaze to meet mine briefly, offering a subtle nod that acknowledged two things at once: that he recognized the envelope's significance, and that he intended to uncover its contents lawfully and transparently. He turned to the inspectors again, requesting clarification. None came. Their silence thickened, their avoidance glaring, their guilt implicit in their refusal to speak. It became clear they hadn't planned for someone with actual authority to appear. They had expected a quiet homeowner overwhelmed by legal pressure, not oversight. With measured care, the newcomer broke the seal. A hush fell across the entire property, wind slowing, birds quieting, even the dust settling as if waiting for what the envelope would reveal. He unfolded the papers inside, his eyes scanning each line quickly with growing intensity. His brow furrowed deeper the further he read, confusion giving way to disbelief, then sharpening into concern that weighed heavily in the air. The inspectors shifted again, but none dared speak. After a long, heavy pause, the newcomer folded the papers back together and held them at his side. His silence radiated power, pressing the inspectors into restless discomfort. The lawyer finally stepped forward with a nervous half-smile, attempting to assert control by demanding the documents back. But the newcomer stopped him with a look alone, sending the words crumbling before they fully formed. He finally spoke. What he revealed struck like a crack of thunder across a clear sky. The confidential documents contained pre-drafted remediation orders, forced acquisition paperwork, and internal communications outlining the strategy to seize my land before the end of the month. Not based on violations, not based on complaints, not based on hazards, but based on opportunity. The HOA sought expansion rights for a new development project, one they hadn't yet disclosed to homeowners or authorities. My land sat directly in the path of their intended expansion zone. They had crafted a quiet campaign to pressure me into selling or force me into financial strain through fabricated violations. Their plan wasn't just unethical, it was illegal on multiple levels, violating property rights, bypassing required approvals, and manipulating procedural authority to orchestrate private gain. The inspectors stood motionless under the weight of that truth. Their coordinated confidence dissolved into a mixture of guilt and fear as they realized their internal paperwork had unraveled their entire operation in front of someone mandated to uphold the law rather than bend it. The newcomer didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. His calm articulation carried more force than shouting ever could. He outlined each violation he identified: coercion attempts, undocumented acquisition proceedings, manipulated violation reports, unauthorized enforcement notices. His tone carried the slow, steady weight of irreversible consequence. The lawyer's face drained of color. Beads of sweat gathered at his temple as he tried to defend the documents, framing them as preliminary drafts or exploratory planning. But the words lacked the conviction needed to disguise the truth written plainly in the paperwork. The newcomer countered each excuse with precise, clinical clarity, unraveling the lawyer's arguments thread by thread until there was nothing left but silence. The inspectors lowered their clipboards, no longer posturing behind them. Their shoulders sagged under the heaviness of exposure, the coordinated unity they arrived with shattered into scattered pieces. The land around us felt different now, not oppressive or threatened, but awakening as if the soil itself recognized the shift in control. I took a slow breath, letting the revelation settle in. The HOA hadn't simply wanted compliance, they wanted the land. They had disguised greed as governance, control as concern, expansion as enforcement. And now, their strategy lay exposed in the harsh morning light. But the newcomer wasn't finished. He held up the confidential envelope and stated clearly that he would be submitting it for formal investigation. Not just internal review, full oversight, legal inquiry, procedural audit. The inspectors' faces tightened with dread. The lawyer stepped back, swallowing hard as though bracing for repercussions he couldn't escape. The newcomer turned again toward me, his voice steady. He assured me that for now, nobody from the HOA was permitted to touch my land or proceed with any inspection, enforcement, or documentation until the investigation concluded. The 72-hour notice was suspended. The acquisition proceedings were frozen. The forced remediation threat was void. My land was protected, not by defiance alone, but by truth now unveiled. But as the inspectors began to retreat, the newcomer paused suddenly, raising his hand to stop them mid-step. Something in the confidential documents had caught his attention, something he hadn't yet said aloud, something heavier than the rest. A seventh name, a seventh visitor, someone who hadn't arrived yet. And whoever that missing individual was, their role in the HOA's plan was far more dangerous than the others. The mention of a seventh name froze the inspectors in place, locking them into a silence far heavier than anything before. Their steps halted mid-motion, bodies tensing as though a shadow had fallen across the gravel. The newcomer held the confidential papers in his steady hand, eyes scanning the lines again with sharper focus. The tension that followed didn't simply thicken, it hardened, settling into the ground like a warning none of us fully understood yet. The missing individual wasn't a simple oversight. The way the inspectors reacted told me this seventh figure carried weight, purpose, and danger far beyond routine HOA procedure. A thin gust of wind moved across the property, fluttering the corners of the documents the newcomer held. His voice lowered as he read aloud the final section, an internal note stating that the special consultant would join after the initial confrontation to ensure homeowner compliance through enhanced negotiation. The wording was careful, but between the lines lay the unmistakable implication that this consultant wasn't just another inspector. They were someone sent when pressure alone wasn't expected to work. Someone the HOA relied on to close cases, using tactics not written in any public bylaw. The inspectors stood rigidly in a line, eyes fixed forward, trying not to react. But their stillness said everything. They feared this seventh individual far more than they feared oversight, exposure, or legal consequences. Even the lawyer, who had maintained a fragile front, now seemed to shrink inward, his gaze flicking nervously down the road as though expecting a vehicle to arrive at any moment. The newcomer folded the documents and tucked them carefully into his jacket, protecting the evidence with controlled purpose. When he turned back to me, his voice carried a tone that blended reassurance with warning. He explained that the HOA had escalated their strategy beyond normal boundaries. This consultant, listed only by last name, had a history of involvement in pressured acquisitions, orchestrated disputes, and manipulated enforcement campaigns. They specialized in pushing homeowners to the brink, using methods that skirted the edge of legality and often succeeded because people gave in before anyone could intervene. I listened in measured silence, letting the information settle like dust after a landslide. The inspectors avoided my eyes now, staring downward as though ashamed of their involvement. Their confidence had long vanished. What remained was the recognition that they had participated in something larger, darker, and far more coordinated than they wanted to admit. The lawyer's breath came unevenly, the veneer of authority stripped away until only raw anxiety remained. The newcomer continued, stating that this consultant's absence wasn't a sign of retreat but a delay. They were still expected, still scheduled, and still moving toward my property. I stepped back slightly, adjusting the shotgun at my side, not raising it, not shifting into threat, but grounding myself in the moment. The land felt deeply still again, a quiet that carried more meaning than any sound. The ground beneath me held the weight of history, stability, and resolve. My porch, my gate, my tree line, everything surrounding me had stood long before this confrontation, and it reminded me of why I wouldn't bend to fabricated claims or hidden agendas. The newcomer informed the inspectors that they were required to remain until he completed formal documentation of the encounter. They obeyed without question, their once commanding posture reduced to compliance. The lawyer hovered behind them, pale and shaken, no longer trying to assert control but merely hoping to escape without further damage. The newcomer began recording details: names, badge numbers, timestamps, procedural discrepancies, the contents of the confidential envelope. His methodical precision left no room for misinterpretation or revision. Each line he wrote carved deeper accountability into the moment. The inspectors fidgeted beneath the weight of documentation they knew would follow them far beyond this property. But as the newcomer worked, a faint sound drifted through the air, a distant hum, low and steady, coming from beyond the bend in the road. The inspectors froze again. The lawyer stiffened. Even the breeze seemed to pause. The newcomer lifted his head, eyes narrowing toward the curve where the trees pressed closest to the road's edge. The hum grew louder. A vehicle was approaching. Not fast, not urgent, but deliberate, slow enough to observe, steady enough to assert presence. Dust stirred behind it like a trailing veil. The tension that surged through the group felt sharper than anything earlier. The inspectors exchanged quick, alarmed glances. The lawyer backed up one step unconsciously, his eyes wide with recognition. The newcomer straightened, closing his notebook and positioning himself between the vehicle's path and the inspectors. His posture shifted, calm replaced by readiness. He glanced at me once, silently acknowledging that whatever was coming now was the moment the confidential papers had warned us about. The car appeared around the corner, a dark SUV with tinted windows, heavier and more imposing than the newcomer's vehicle. It approached slowly, each rotation of the tires pressing significance into the gravel. The inspectors lowered their heads as though afraid to be recognized. The lawyer swallowed hard, fingers trembling at his sides. The SUV rolled to a stop just outside the gate. The engine cut. Silence pressed in again. The back door opened. A tall figure stepped out, posture controlled, expression unreadable. Dressed not in HOA uniform but in a subtle, authoritative suit that blended enforcement with intimidation, they scanned the scene with sharp, calculating focus. Their gaze moved from the inspectors to the lawyer to the newcomer, then finally to me. And in that measured glance I saw the truth. They weren't here to inspect. They weren't here to negotiate. They were here to finish what the HOA had started. But the story had changed. The newcomer stepped forward, raising a hand not in greeting, but in warning. His voice carried steady authority as he announced the ongoing investigation, the suspension of all HOA actions, and the requirement for the consultant to stand down immediately. His tone left no room for manipulation or argument. The consultant's expression tightened, their confidence momentarily shaken. They scanned the inspectors, noting their defeated postures, then the lawyer, who now looked like a shell of the authority he once projected. Their gaze returned to me, and in that silence, the grip of their influence cracked. The land was no longer theirs to claim. The strategy no longer viable. The pressure no longer effective. The newcomer stepped closer, stating firmly that any further action would result in legal consequences beyond the HOA's ability to contain. The consultant finally nodded once, slow, reluctant, but decisive. The SUV door closed again. The engine started. And just like that, the threat they brought rolled back down the road and out of sight. The inspectors left next, defeated and silent. The lawyer followed, pale and unsteady. When the last vehicle disappeared, the land exhaled. The newcomer turned to me, offering a nod that carried gratitude and respect. The battle wasn't mine alone. But the victory was.